we get started. So I'd like to personally welcome to this panel on unleashing private financing for zero-emission trucks. It's a partnership between the Smart Freight Center, the government of the Netherlands, and WPBCSD. So I'm Cristiano Façanha. I'm Director of Road Freight Electrification at the Smart Freight Center. And I just wanted to share a few observations with you, just to frame what we're going to discuss today. I think it is common knowledge that road transport is responsible for the lion's share of transportation emissions, over 75%. What is not so well known is that medium and heavy duty vehicles, they represent a very small share of the on-road fleet, 5% on a global basis. But this 5% of the on-road fleet, they consume over a third of the fuel consumption, and they emit over 75% of local pollution. So we're talking about a very effective target for emissions controls because it's a relatively small share of our fleet. And another statistics that I love. So if trucking were a country, it would be the fourth largest emitter of GHG emissions in the world. So we're talking about a very sizable opportunity here. The truck electrification is one of the most important strategies for logistics decarbonization. Electric trucks can reduce emissions from diesel by over 90%, right? And they will also be a boon for investment, in particular for private investment. So let's discuss why. One is on technology readiness, right? So battery electric technology for trucks has advanced really rapidly in the past few years in a way that we did not imagine, even 5 years ago. So today, there are over 300 models worldwide of electric trucks attending most truck applications. Our expectation is that they're going to be cheaper to own and operate before the end of the decade, for all truck applications. And in some countries today, with good incentives and good policies, they're already cost effective. They have achieved TCO parity today. Second element, policy. So leading governments are moving ahead with strong policies and regulations requiring zero-emission trucks, in particular with the upcoming CO2 standards for trucks in Europe and California's Advanced Clean Trucks rule that was adopted by other 9 states in the US, representing 20 to 30% of US demand. Third driver, industry leadership. Leading shippers, some of whom we will listen from today, those are the ones that generate the freight demand. They're signaling that truck electrification will be a major strategy to decarbonize their logistics operations. And yet, despite strong policies, strong industry leadership, exponential sales, in the most developed markets, electric trucks still account for less than 1% of truck sales. So we have a lot of work to do here. Now, which brings us to finance. So a set of interrelated investment barriers are really hindering progress, here. So they include high upfront costs for vehicles and infrastructure. They include a lack of borrowing capacity, from small and medium-sized fleets, unfamiliarity with zero-emission trucks as an asset class. Yet we're talking about uncertainty about residual values, and we're talking about insufficient scale of small deployments, so far, to attract institutional capital. So we know the instruments, the finance instruments to overcome these barriers and boost investments. So the key here in this panel is going to be how to best blend these different types of investment mechanisms to boost investment and zero-emission trucks. So next, I would like to invite Vice Minister for Mobility and Transport at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands, Mr. Kees van den Burg. Please, welcome.
Thank you, Cristiano, and ladies and gentlemen. Just a few years ago, freight transport emissions were considered hard to abate. And today we know we can drastically reduce these emissions. The technology exists and is increasingly cost effective. Governments, like the Dutch government, play a key role in facilitating the transition to zero-emission transport through robust, clear and constant regulations matched by ambitious policy. And by uniting stakeholders around a plan of action and a timeline for zero-emission trucks and buses. In the Netherlands, we have clear policies aiming towards this transition. By 2025, all new buses for public transport coming into operation will be zero-emission, and by 2030, the total bus fleet will be zero-emission. Also, 29 cities have announced zero-emission zones for commercial vehicles from 2035 onwards. And to support this, we introduced a purchase subsidies for zero-emission trucks and vans. We also work together with all relevant stakeholders, such as distribution system operators, utilities, and companies to secure sufficient charging and refueling infrastructure. However, both climate change and transportation do not stop at the borders. So it's critical to collaborate internationally, and that's why the Netherlands, together with NGO Coalstart, initiate the global MOU on zero-emission medium and heavy duty vehicles at the COP26 in Glasgow in 2021. The signatories, currently 33 countries and 130 endorsers, pledged that all new buses and trucks sold will be zero-emission by 2040. We continue to welcome new countries and companies to the global MOU community. Although cost parity for zero-emission vehicles will be reached this decade, they currently have a much higher upfront cost, you mentioned this, than their diesel alternatives. And to make sure these costs aren't the obstacle, we can give market parties investment security so that investment can grow strongly, as this so stimulating a market uptake. Effectively mobilizing public and private sector investment stakeholders like governments, banks, pension funds, fleets, and others is key to unlocking transport electrification at scale. And investments in zero-emission vehicles and the elements to support them must be rapidly scaled. And at last, but not least, to ensure a just transition, we also have to make sure that emerging economies are taking part and can benefit from the transition. In the next decades, the population, wealth, and demand for mobility will grow in many emerging markets. If that growth can happen in a sustainable way, there will be an enormous profit for climate, local air quality, people's health, and for the local economy with clean jobs and a secure energy system. Ladies and gentlemen, today we know that the road transport sector is ready to abate. So let's make the transition happen now. I wish you a happy blending. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Business Minister. And next, I would like to invite Nancy Gillis. She's the Senior Director of Industrial Pathway Transformation at the... Yes? Okay. So come on. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. There's nothing like giving a long title and then an even longer organizational name to make yourself a very positive person with the facilitator for the session. As was mentioned, I'm Nancy Gillis. I actually work for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I'm very proud to have just joined there. I come with a background in something that I find very relevant, which is the formulation of demand. So the panel today will talk a lot about how financing is happening. One of the things that I want to talk about for that financing is the demand for more sustainable products and services. And how do you actually create that demand stimulus? Now, one of the reasons that I'm now at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is because they're an organization that works with companies. So we are business-centric. But I like to say, being a good German, even though my American English belies that we work with businesses who like to roll up their sleeves, actually like to get it done. And one of the projects that I get to spend a short amount of time on just to introduce is one of those get it done projects. Zev-MI, as my colleague from the World Business Council is here, I'll introduce him in a second. He's the one who's going to give me those subtle signals about my talking points, if I have my facts about the project correct, if I've gone off of. And then, of course, we have those in the back who are power dressers.
This is for her. This ain't for nobody.
Just for emotional support. But what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the program because it brings a form of financing to bear the demand signal brought by private sector. So ZEV-MI is a program that was part of the ZEV-TC project, so the Zero Emissions Vehicles Transition Coalition that was launched, I think, at COP26. She excused her colleague. Good. And what we had happened there is the US and UK come together, and they are now joined by 17 other governments. And you have this conversation about how do we stimulate the zero emission vehicles as was introduced. Fast forward to COP27, you have the engagement of India. And this is actually where the project becomes very interesting. Because what you have with the US and UK is you have what we frequently hear about the public. You have another public, so US, UK. You bring in your third public, India. And you bring India with an ideation of wanting to focus on trucks, very much engendered by a conversation with the UK and US about their interest in potentially providing some financing. But we've had the public before. Now it's the private. But what kind of private? Private sector purchasers. So what WBCSD was brought in was to actually bring into conversations with India, with Neti Ayor, correct? Which we are still working with and very appreciative. Their EFAS program, which is part of this initiative as well. Working together and through collaborative discussions where India is bringing in the interest in trucks, bringing in the interest to support that, bringing in, importantly, the interest to create a policy enabling environment. What you have is the power of demand coming forward. And our facilitator in his opening comments talked a little bit about some of the regulatory things, the market behavior that is causing those who use trucking services for logistics to pay attention. In particular, the emphasis on scope 3 emissions and being responsible for those are making companies pay attention. And so those companies paying attention are stepping forward and actually creating demand. What form of demand? Advanced purchase agreements. So stating up and saying, we will actually buy. And in this case, for this project, it's 8,000 electric trucks. Now, the form of whether the actual trucks or whether the services of those trucks, still unclear and being worked on, but it's a quantifiable demand signal. And demand signals are important to private sector players. The form of demand signals is important to private sector players. So some of you may have met me or have had some conversations with me before, and you know that secretly, I'm actually a procurement weenie. That's right. I know I hide it well. But I think that my colleague from Smart Freight Center is smiling because he's heard me say this before. Procurement is sexy. It really is. Why? Because it unlocks the private sector money in no other way. It's not procurement in the sense of contractual relationships, right? And in this case, the role of advanced purchase agreements, the ability to actually signal to providers that you as a customer are willing through this contractual relationship to go ahead and buy their product and service. That's the actual required piece that unlocks financing from banks and so forth. So that's one form of what we have done at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is actually think about how demand can be exemplified, and in particular, through the power of procurement. Now, you'll hear more about other forms of demand through the panel, but if I've, in anything that I've said, excited you about the project that we are doing, I want to, just because it's here, because it's you, the special audience, allow you to get in on the ground floor of another exciting project. This is just between us. My motivational men.
Yes, sir.
This is the secret sauce I told you about earlier. So Tama, if my colleague, who actually runs the program at WBCSD, if you could give them the secret sauce and the password for the event, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. So yeah, there is really an opportunity for all of you who are interested in how to leverage the power of demand to accelerate transformation at market level to join a workshop on Friday. Friday morning, we are going to bring some of the key governments, partners in talking about what does demand for trucking looks like as a solution to the energy transition. We want to look at it at system level. We want to have impact. And we're calling upon all of you who have courage to jump into the unknown to join us, including power dressers.
I got the courage.
Thank you. Right. So if you do want to join that, please connect with me and we'll be happily providing you with the passwords and the key to the room. Thank you very much. Back to you, Cristiano.
Thank you so much, Thomas and Nancy. We're going to keep you very busy, not just like today, but in months and years to come. So this is a very, very important topic and one that is just going to be more important. So, through partners like WBCSD, and then a lot of other NGOs that are here present, we're definitely going to get our hands very, very dirty, like in this process. So next, I would like to invite all of our panelists, just to come to these beautiful chairs here, and we're going to have a very, very exciting panel. So please do come forward. This is working. So just some framing here in the panel. If we can all move a little closer, I feel that would be great. Let's get cozier like here. So I was talking earlier. Right now we have like an important confluence of technology readiness, growing cost parity, policy ambition, industry leadership, all pointing out to much larger demand for zero-emission trucks. And so as I said, zero-emission trucks and electric trucks, like in particular, will be a boon for private investment. Yet the enabling conditions for private investment, are not trivial, since we need like very different blends of financial instruments by very different stakeholders for the very different use cases of trucks, right? And so the main theme of this panel is how private finance can accelerate zero-emission truck deployment in the near term. This is very important, like in the near term. We're not talking about in like 2040 or 2050. We're talking in the coming years. There are many different perspectives. Like in our panel, we have those from shippers, which are the freight owners, carriers, investors, and transportation as a service providers. So I'm going to start with you, Eleanor. This is Eleanor Bastian. She's a principal program manager at Amazon. So we know that Amazon has very ambitious, like emission reduction targets. Some of the most ambitious in the market, and you're also undertaking like major efforts to electrify your fleets and your trucking operations, right? So, based on your experience to date, how do you see the role as shippers, as investors for zero-emission trucks?
Thank you, Cristiano, and thank you for everything you did to make this panel possible, and to Thomas for supporting. It's great to be here today and to be talking to a little bit of a different audience than usual, and for my space, which is partnerships and transportation sustainability. So to answer the question succinctly, as I was instructed, I think just speaking in the big picture, the first big announcements that Amazon made with the climate pledge were around last mile, and our agreement with Rivian to purchase 100,000 delivery vans and deploy them by 2030. And we already have over 10,000 of these vehicles on the road in 800 markets in the US. And that is not to speak for the volumes that we have in Europe of those vans, as well as from other OEMs in India. We have more than 10,000 vehicles. So for that last mile, where we're charging in yard and have a contractual arrangement, exclusive contractual arrangement with our drivers and the companies that they have, we feel like we've got that sorted and handled. But when we look at the other transportation modes and other use cases for trucks, we see a lot more challenges because there are many cases where we can't be the asset owner of a truck. And that really changes the finances. So, in the US, we rely on tens of thousands of small and medium-sized carriers. And these are, your mom and pop operations, the owner operator. I heard recently that there are still over 10,000 people who park their tractor in their driveway every night. And so how Amazon is able to support that population and adopting cleaner technology when we can't use the power of our name Amazon to improve the financing is something that we're very focused on right now. I don't think there are any obvious solutions that I can share that we've deployed. We have some experience in India that I'll be sharing more on later this week at a workshop hosted by Smart Freight Center. But I think broadly, we're thinking about how can we ensure residual value? How can we better capture the risk of this adoption by these carriers that we depend upon that do really important work for us every year? Sort of change the mindset, I think, broadly about the risk inherent here. So I'll pause there and turn it over to you again.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you for your true leadership, in the sector. This is something that we've never done before. We're all learning on the go here, and then having players like you that are willing to be the front runners is extremely important. Here. So next, I'd like to invite Bruce Marsh. He's a senior director of government affairs with DHL. And then, so we know based on your latest statistics, there's some 36,000 zero-emission vehicles in your global fleet. And then we also know that you work with very different business models out there. So you both have a large dedicated, and then fleet, but you also work with many third parties that are typically much smaller. In terms of affiliates. So could you tell us how DHL determined the best business models, in particular the finance business models for each of the different use cases? And then how do you see the role of private investors, to support your journey to fleet electrification?
Sure. Well, thank you first for having me, and to Smart Freight Center and WBCSD. No, I think it's very interesting. Our journey started a long time ago in terms of as an industry. We've been at it now in terms of electrification for I would say 15 years. And as Eleanor stated, the last mile part of this is probably, I wouldn't say it's an easy part of it, but it's certainly one where we see a much easier path going forward. And we are making a lot of progress. As you mentioned, we just came out with our new ESG report for 2023. And we're doing really well in that area. And frankly, initially we had trouble finding last mile vehicles. We made them ourselves. That's a story into itself. We got out of that business. And so we've been very encouraged by the market for the last mile as pickup and delivery vehicles. And historically, we bought them. We were an owner, an operator of those vehicles. And just recently, in the last, I would say 3 years, we've really shifted post-COVID from an ownership model to a leasing model. And we find it's easier for a number of reasons. First, it's just the CapEx involved, it's significant. We don't have to lay down the same kinds of investment that we would have to if we were outright owning. The maintenance aspects of it, the preventive maintenance, those kinds of things are obviously helpful. And we're still so new at this that I think there's another aspect of this is that we run our vehicles, the last mile vehicles, in a 5 to 7 year cycle. And there's a lot we don't know about what the residual value of those vehicles are going to be like in 7 years. And whereas with our traditional ICE or diesel, we know we could probably sell those for a certain amount of money. We know we can probably sell, those BEV vehicles as well, but there's still some uncertainty there. So leasing gives us a little bit more of peace of mind by shifting to that strategy. And we're really, in terms of and then on the medium and heavy duty, we're really just starting. And I think we're almost entirely doing leasing there, just because of the 2x, 3x factor. And so we're early stages. I would say we're working with major lenders in a lot of different countries. And surprisingly, on the last mile, we are finding, and my responsibility, my region is the Americas, and I can speak, to the Americas better than I can to any of the other regions where we operate. And obviously we operate globally. But we are finding a lot of lenders out there now that are willing to help us finance our EVs in emerging markets. And that's a really positive sign. There are a few pockets where we can't. Maybe Central America, for example, is one. The medium and heavy duty, still a challenge, but we are leasing those. But we're really just starting in emerging markets. So, I mean, those are maybe some answers. There are obviously challenges, but we're pretty optimistic, going forward that we've got a recipe that works.
No, thank you, Bruce, and it's great to have your different perspective of somebody who actually needs to operate like the trucks and work with those parties that are operating those zero emission vehicles. Very interesting part about like the issue of residual value. Like here, for those of you who don't know, like part of the finance of diesel trucks is that those who are purchasing new trucks, they count on a specific resale value, like when they sell the trucks 5 years, 7 years later, right? Because zero emission trucks are so new, there's a lot of uncertainty around it. But one thing that we can borrow from the experience of electric buses, like from a technology standpoint, electric buses and electric trucks are exactly the same from a technology standpoint, right? The signals that we're getting for electric buses that are much more advanced in terms of deployment is that the levels of battery degradation are much lower than we initially expected. So there is a little bit of like light at the end of the tunnel that can inform us about the uncertainty of residual value here. And so next, which is going to be interesting to hear like Mahua's perspective, because you have a lot of experience with electric buses. So I'd like to hear from Mahua Acharya. She's the former managing director and CEO of the State Energy Transition Company in the government of India, and the founder of the International Energy Transition Platform. So Mahua, what makes you confident about the investment opportunities for zero-emission trucks? And are there lessons that we can draw from your experiences, like leading the deployment of electric buses, like in India?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for having me at this event. I must also confess I'm no transport guru, and I'm just surrounded by transport gurus over here. I know nothing about trucks. But I do want to recognize that when we started this bus journey, I have WRI Pavan sitting here. There was a lot of people that I relied on in building out that ecosystem. And I suspect that going forward with the trucking business, we've got to just build up on that ecosystem and rely on that ecosystem. I relied on the generosity of the market to tell me how things worked. And I suspect a lot of it is going to be the same this time going around. So thank you all for helping put that bus project on the roads. What gives me comfort? If there was something, or at least confidence, not yet comfort, if there was something I learned from designing that bus project out there, sorry, let me just back up a little bit. The India bus work aggregated demand for bus services across states in an otherwise federal system. So there were lots of sort of barriers along the way. I think if there's anything I learned through that exercise is, number one, get the business model right. The demand comes, and the demand will always come if people figure out where to make money. And there's making money in different pockets. So get the business model right, and scale happens automatically. I know it's easy to say, but it took us some time to figure out the business model for electric buses. And by that, I mean, you can say that, of course, you can do gross cost contracting, and that's fine. Well, every city told me at that time, my city's different. My roads are different. I've got potholes. I've got a lot of traffic. It hardly moves. My roads are very narrow. I can't take these long buses. You know what? Most cities have the same problem. And then you learn very quickly that you can homogenize a lot of these things. And that's where I think get the business model right is one. And that needs a little bit of trial and error. The other thing I learned is in that bus work, and I think some of it you were saying with DHL, our automatic thinking is, let me do all of it myself. I spend my own money, and I'll buy the product, and then I'll run that vehicle, and then it'll be fine. I mean, but we all do that because we're looking for practical things to get done tomorrow. But really, to build a market, you can't have one person do everything. And there has to be different people doing things that they're best at. So if we can think already from the beginning that if we were to split this business out, perhaps if leasing is in fact the way to do it, because somebody else has to own the vehicle, someone else has to drive the vehicle, and DHL has to do what it does best, which is move stuff around. So I think if we design like that to keep people in their natural ecosystems, the barriers to movement are that much less. And that has to be recognized upfront. And the third piece is, a lot of people would tell me, and I've told through my career, oh, let's start with a pilot and then we'll see if it works and we'll go to the next one. But I've just seen now over time, perhaps it's a selection of the kind of things I've been working on. The level of effort that goes into a pilot is very similar to the level of effort that goes into something bigger. So yes, all about scalability, but if you can design at scale as opposed to scalability or potential to scale, let's see if we can do it. And I suspect, I have a sense now, but maybe like 3 years ago when I was talking to Christoph, there was a lot of discussion that we had on, let's see if we can aggregate demand. And I was just like, well, we don't have any vehicles in India. So let's just wait a little bit and we see if vehicles come up and when they come up, because you can't build a market as big as India with one company, with a few of their vehicles and maybe 100 trucks. I think a country as big as India, where I live, got to move to at least a few thousand. And now I think perhaps there's a few products on the road that you can use and get started with that.
Exactly. No, thank you, Mahua. And it's really important to when we talk about pilot projects for zero-emission trucks, we're not. The goal is not really to test the technology. The technology has been tested in a lot of places in the world. It works. What we're testing are business models, like here. Those are contractual relationships. Those are projects where we have different shippers that are aggregating demand. So how can we sit in the same room with shippers who very often are competitors, right? That might be bound by antitrust regulations. Like, how do they work together? Like, it's like enabling this contractual relationships in this business models. That's what we're piloting, right? Like here. So continuing in India, I would like to invite Mr. Raman Siva Subramanian. He's a chairman and managing director of the Small Industry Development Bank of India, SIDBI. So Mr. Raman, we know that SIDBI is very eager to financially support like shippers and logistics service providers with bringing the first 500 electric trucks on the road, like in India. And so in your take, what type of financial solutions can help like de-risk this type of investment? And what is the opportunity to build like this finance ecosystem like here in India?
Well, thank you so much. It's great being here. Just a couple of sort of macro level data points. I'm told that in India, we have something like 6 million trucks, ranging from the light commercial vehicle to the heavy trucks. Obviously, the solution or the financing solution for each segment would therefore be very different. We also have a situation where most of the trucks are owned by individuals. So there are very few corporate logistic truck companies. Of course, they exist, but the maximum number of trucks are in the hands of individuals who end up being driver cum owners. So that again brings a different dimension to the financing problem. We've done a bit of work on the light commercial. Again, I heard just before me that the last mile is really where the problem is. And certainly, if we can solve for that more efficiently, then we might be able to elongate the life of the EV. So at the end of the day, it's really a total cost outlay that bothers us. I mean, as financiers, we find that nobody is willing to put in that extra bit of money and buy an EV vehicle at, say, 1.4, 1.5 times that of an ICE vehicle. Now, if we could somehow demonstrate that the life of that vehicle is not, say, 10 years in the case of a truck, but say 14 years, now that would make a huge difference to the fact that the EMI itself would entirely change. So how do we really do this? Because as a financier, whether we do, a new truck financing, or as in India, we have some non-bank finance companies which have completely mastered the science of doing second-hand truck financing, which is even more risky, but it's been going on for years. Now, both these markets have to be tackled, but do we have enough information collateral to be able to, as a financier, better understand the EV product? And when I say information collateral, of course, all of us would take the truck as primary security, but we do not really have anything more than that. So how are we really looking at the data points? Of course, the telematics is available with us. The telematics is very important, but I don't think whatever little has happened in India, people have even bothered to look at the telematics. So we really need the ability of a digital platform that is going to operate as a sort of front end from where the financiers would end up getting information, of course, compressed in sort of the right way, such that as a financier, if you're actually funding a particular truck, you have the health of that particular truck in front of you at some periodicity. So it's really, going down to the granular. We as financiers, whether we're a larger bank or a smaller NBFC, as we call them, the ability for us to provide a better rate of interest would be directly proportional to the amount of information that we get on a regular basis. And I think that is really what we have to solve for. And of course, I can tell you that in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler space, this has been solved. So we have sort of financed 4 or 5 large NBFCs and fleet aggregators. And we've actually got them to understand, not that we did anything, but they're smart enough to understand that the telematics is where the game is. And some of them have gone to a level where they are assessing the battery health and actually, in a sort of lease manner, they recall a particular two-wheeler and supply another two-wheeler. Now, is that possible in the truck situation? I would really sort of prima facie have doubts, because you're talking about a different unit economics, talking about an entirely different terrain that those trucks travel in. They go across the country at times if they're heavy trucks. So what is it that we can get for those trucks? One of the things that we are thinking of is all the trucks in India, when they do these large intercity travel, assuming that, of course, there are, charging stations along the way, which is another very big issue. But we actually have trucks attached with something called an e-way bill, which is part of the larger GST system. So in India, we have a very, very sophisticated GST system where every invoice is available centrally and bankers have access to that. We also have an e-way bill attached to that particular GST system, which is attached to each truck journey. So, we need to get deeper into the data points that would be able to give a financier a greater level of comfort that there is something we can look forward to de-risk that particular finance. So let me just stop there.
Thank you very much. And then next we're gonna hear from Nicholas Reynedal. He's the general manager of North America with Einride here, and we've heard from many panelists here the importance of different ownership structures. Here, we've talked about leasing models. There could be other models here, such as transportation as a service, right? That can bundle the vehicle ownership together with the infrastructure. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspective, Nicholas here, in particular about what do you think drive private financing, specifically for charging infrastructure for electric trucks, here.
Is this on? Yeah. So first of all, we're a scale up. We've been around for 7 years. So in terms of financing structures, we're highly dependent on it. So I'm happy to comment on that. And I was listening to the panel, and I think I will focus a bit on specific financing that we were able to secure from Barclays. It's the first in the industry, and I want to be pretty specific about that. So when last time we raised capital at Einride, we brought in 500 million, 200 equity, and 300 in a debt facility from Barclays, which is basically to finance the fleets that we deploy. We don't want to use our equity for that. We want to use our equity to grow the team and grow the services. So we were dependent on a way to grow our footprint from a financing perspective that wasn't diluting our equity. I've 20 years now in this industry, started out in advisory, then 10 years in the Volvo Group, and now 6 years here with Einride. And typically the freight industry is very fragmented and very sort of transactional. You mentioned sort of a myriad of owner operators. 85% of the trucks that are sold today are typically going through owner operators. And it's a tough ask for an owner operator, small family business, to put up the money 2x for the vehicle, and then on top of that also facilitate for infrastructure. So, and also the industry today, and I know coming from an OEM, is very much focused on TCO. And TCO, total cost of ownership, is quite often centered around what's the overall cost of operating one truck. And I think when you're switching to an electric freight management system, we need to rethink that sort of fragmented, transactional industry very much focused on TCO. The Volvo Group, for a period of time, was responsible for the industrial strategy, which is how do you invest in your factory footprint? What are the drivers for that? To take one very specific example, we were automating one of the factories that were doing axles and transmissions for construction equipment machinery. And what do you look at? So it's a pretty significant investment, upfront, in order to automate the factory. In this case, we had 13 different production cells, a heavy investment. You look at that investment over a 7-year period. What's the sort of NPV of that investment? What's the ROI, or if you want to work with IRR? There are a myriad of sort of established financials way of measuring, should we go for this investment or should we not go for this investment? And installing electric freight is much more like sort of taking a decision on a factory rather than buying a truck with a handshake or through a broker. You need to make sure that that installed system makes sense. Infrastructure, number of trucks, what's the operational use case? And then more importantly, that once you've taken that investment, you want to make sure that you have a high and even utilization on it. And I want to just be very optimistic about this. When we look at data, and we have over 120 different Fortune 500 companies now integrated in our platform, 60% of that, especially regional hub and spoke freight, comes with a good business case today if you go electric. But the trick is that don't talk about TCO, but much to what you look to for a factory when you install automation is that you look at the overall equipment efficiency, each production cell being highly utilized and an even utilization. And that drives a very positive business case. And it's the same thing here. If you install an electric freight system, not a couple of trucks, but a system, and you have the software that allow you to optimize and utilize that, the business case actually makes sense today. So what we're asking for from our customers is that we don't want to talk about buying freight over the counter. We want to talk about how do we install an efficient freight management system for you. And then what we ask for in return is 5 to 7 year contracts. And this is in an industry where you typically do 3 months, maybe 1 year. And that allows us to put up the upfront investment, and then we operate it effectively in a way that the business case makes sense from the get-go. And that has really been the driver behind the debt facility that we have with Barclays, that we have long-term commitments from customers, shippers in this case, the PepsiCo and Starbucks of the world. And that financial contract in itself, our customer contract, carries a known financial value over a long-term period. So instead of putting assets to get financing, we put the customer contract as the sort of collateral for that debt financing facility. And that allows us to really draw effectively on financing today.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for this perspectives. Like here, I think that, you know, what Einride has is a solution to what a lot of other people see as a problem, right? So I think that that's a really good connection. Like here, and you know, if I heard this correctly, you know, just to make the business model work, like you need scale, right? And then you need like a very good software to ensure like maximum utilization of assets, and you need like commitment from your customers, you know, so that they're in for like the long game, like, and not as much transactional. So I think that those are really like good insights. Like here, I wanted to see if there are any questions from the audience. For those who would like, there is a microphone there. I would ask you to introduce yourself, your affiliation, and who you're addressing your question to, or if it's just a general question, it's okay too.
I'm Jeremy Anderson, International Transport Workers Federation. Can you hear me okay? And yeah, thank you for a very interesting panel. Mine is actually a general question. And it's about, you know, how do you factor in something I haven't heard very much about, which is, you know, the uncertainty around the workforce side. So this industry has struggled for kind of many years around, you know, recruiting sufficient drivers. And as we move to e-vehicles, you know, there are big questions around kind of the maintenance side. And adding on top of that, as many of you on the panel have spoken about, in this very fragmented industry with many kind of owner drivers, this is creating kind of a lot of additional uncertainty for a lot of drivers already in the industry. So in terms of, will there be access, you know, to finance for many of these over drivers to upgrade to the new e-vehicles? So I think the just transition aspect of this discussion is really important if we are going to move the needle. So how do you factor that kind of workforce development and just transition angle into this whole picture? Thank you.
Would anybody like to tackle? Go ahead, Nicholas.
I can maybe comment quickly. So we've been operational for 4 years, and I wanted to say that heavy duty electric freight, I'm super optimistic about it. I mean, 4 years of experience, and it really works in a good way. And from a shipper perspective, we're able to offer a competitive business case as well. For those 4 years, both in Europe and here in North America, we've had zero attrition on the drivers. Some carriers that I talk to have up to 70% attrition. Very interested to see what you think, Eleonore, but having new equipment, less vibration, no noise pollution, no respiratory health problems, and typically stellar equipment, state of the art, makes the drivers very happy. And we've also been seeing that more younger people and more women are interested in getting into being an operator of those assets as well. So I can only speak for our own experience. We're very optimistic about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I mean, every single testimonial that I see, like from actual truck drivers of electric trucks, have been nothing but stellar. And if you just Google it, you'll see it yourself, like as well. Any others would like to comment on that?
Some experience. I mean, I'll limit some of my conversation, the response to something we found in India. So there are two questions in your question. One is, what do we do with drivers? And the other is, what happens to the just transition as you move to electric? They're two different things. On the driver situation, I completely understand. Most drivers in our experience turned out that they were just happier driving an electric vehicle. And then we found that they also felt better and they were paid more. And then they were paid even more when the OEM decided to run the training program for them. And why did OEMs decide to run a training program? Because the increase in efficiency from a trained driver who's moving from diesel to now electric was up to 7%. And 7% is what an OEM tells you, but actually in reality is probably a little bit more because they stay on the conservative side, and that's related to driver salary. So in fact, from everything we've seen across the sectors, people just are happier driving in electric, and consumers are also just happier boarding in electric. The other issue on just transition, as you mentioned, is to do with what happens to the number of parts. There's 118 parts that go into a bus, 124 that go somewhere else. In an electric, that 118 goes on to 51. That's a much bigger issue. The issue is upstream supply chain. What happens to companies that are making those parts? And what happens to them as they transition over to a whole industry that's moving into electric? And will there be job losses there? I don't have an answer, but you can just, the numbers in the front just look like there are just way less parts.
Yeah. So one thing, and I being mindful of time here, like, yes, there will be job losses on the manufacturing side, but there will be job gains on the infrastructure side. So which are generally local jobs. Like manufacturing jobs are very concentrated, like in place, but infrastructure jobs are like spread like across the board, like here. Next question, Pawan.
Yeah. Thank you. I actually have two questions. One is, are we comfortable with the technology of being BEV? I asked this because I was looking recently with bus data, and the battery degradation, what we are seeing is literally 4 to 5 years, although the warranty says 8 years. So there are those concerns about degradation and charging, and that becomes quite amplified in the truck ecosystem. So are we okay with BEVs, or we're talking about H2Is? Although we have heard this as diversions, but I just wanted a little more understanding. Question on financing itself, twofold. One is it good to start off just with organized fleets, which looks like what I heard from the panel? While in many of the countries, in India, for example, 95% would be individual operators, right? What kind of a market ecosystem are we talking about to create more from a financing perspective? And Moha, we were just talking before entering this hall. Is there a way to address that? Because that's the way we're going to solve the decarbonization problem for truck owners, right? There's a small owners, one truck, 2 trucks, and it's going to be very, very difficult in terms of how do we really create a market ecosystem for them?
Pawan, are you addressing the question to anybody in specific or to the whole panel?
Maybe technology you will pick up, Christian.
Okay.
The financing, I have, I think, Mahua and Mr. Shivasubramanian.
Let's go to the financing question, because I want to give room to the panelists to speak, and then I'll talk quickly about technology.
So let me just compound your question and say that the biggest challenge that we find in India in the truck industry is the celebration of the truck owners when they shift from diesel to actually CNG. They have no interest in going to electric. So, I think we need to solve a much larger problem because, at the end of it, it's his money. He's getting a much better return just converting to CNG because it's cheaper. The retrofitting is very simple. And therefore, he's good to go. And the world is saying that CNG is less carbon dirty than diesel. So, we have to solve for that problem too. But I think, looking at the longer run in terms of, large trucks moving electric, and as you said, 95% is owned by probably, single trucks owned by each person. And, how do we get them to get financing from the banks? Because very few banks are financing individual truck owners. It's all the NBFCs, and we know that the interest rates are, upwards of 22%, etc. Now, this is really the big challenge, and I have a simple answer. It is a huge credit guarantee scheme. So we've run credit guarantee schemes for smaller, sort of vehicles. But of course, our larger credit guarantee scheme runs across any MSME. So if I look at them, all of these are MSMEs in our parlance. And therefore, we should be able to run them into a credit guarantee scheme that already exists, where 75% of the loan is covered by credit guarantee, and it's a sovereign guarantee. So the bank also gets the benefit of a lower capital charge because on 75%, they don't have a capital charge. So it's a very good product. We just have to, flog it that much more. But I think this is certainly one of the ways that we'll be able to get more bank finance coming into this sector, because they'll get covered and maybe, add a few initial SOPs to it so that they take to it faster.
And I'm going to answer very quickly on the technology choice part. For the climate crisis that we have, like today, we don't have time. We have to act now. And then right now, we don't have a choice of technology other than battery electric. So fuel cells are much, much earlier in the development stage. I mean, it might be like a technology that is going to come, to solve some of the use cases. But if given that the priority is near-term deployment, like battery technology it is, and then the issues with battery degradation, I think that are going to be mostly resolved as production volumes go up and OEMs learn like from it. So I think that those issues are going to be essentially solved, like once we bring scale to the market. Does somebody else have?
I was just on the technology point. I mean, I think what you said makes a lot of sense. I think we're, battery electric. We're obviously into battery electric. We'd love to use more hydrogen. We're just starting. We're doing some pilots. I think it's something that long term we see a lot of potential there, but it's just it's the supply. We can't get the green hydrogen that we need really anywhere, even in the US and Western Europe. It's very difficult. And where we are running some pilots, it's where we're very close to a readily available supply.
So I think right now I'm like the organizers are telling me that we're like out of time.
That's fine. Paul one essentially stole my questions, so
that's great. Thank you. So I would like to thank all the panelists for the great contributions. So please, a round of applause to the panelists. And I would like to invite Christoph Wolf. He's the CEO of Smart Freight Center for some very brief closing remarks. So Christoph, bring us all to an end.
Like the two minutes. First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's in the afternoon, so I think attention goes down, and so thank you very much for being here. So first of all, I would like to make some reference for great collaboration. So this space about zero-emission trucks is actually a space where a few organizations work together. I want to make credit to WBCSD for also the Clean Collective on transport finance, CCTF, the great work with WRI, with UC Davis and CalSTART, the Dutch government,
And as you can see, I think maybe surprisingly, a lot of our work goes in India. So India is especially actually ambitious about it. And maybe one word on the just transition. On Thursday, we actually have a panel, and I think together with the colleagues from SIDB, where we actually look deep into that question. Yeah, can actually the EV transition be a just transition, or even increase, bring benefits to the lives and livelihoods for drivers? I think it's an important question. We are a bit a smart freight center as we work on this predominantly across the globe. So normally we could actually add to the panel somebody who is actually working on charging stations, an OEM, an electricity provider. So you always need a village, yeah, to basically bring this forward. So this is actually a part of the complexity of all of that. And you need policy. But I think the one thing that it actually has become clear, without finance, nothing works. Yeah. So I think it was pretty clear from the shippers, from Amazon and DHL. So you work towards leasing models, especially if it's about financing owner operators, because it's a fragmented sector, you need finance. Without finance, this is not going to work. And we will actually need to bring confidence education. Demand aggregation is important, but demand aggregation will be important in the concrete. So I've seen, I mean, we've moved now. We've seen that there's aggregated demand to 30,000, 50,000 trucks over the next couple of years, but still the deployment is not happening. And why is it not happening? Because demand aggregation actually needs to happen concrete in projects, yeah, on corridors, around ports, etc. And that's what we need to work on. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah. Are you?